We are painting up another Vigilant squad for the Imperial Agents Combat Patrol. This box comes with a total of 20 Vigilants, or the individual guys, and a couple of dogs. With that said, don't worry, we're not painting up the exact same scheme. We base the original 10 men on the Swiss Guard and partially the Catholic Church. And conveniently for us, the Swiss Guard have two uniforms. They have the dress uniform that we used previously, as well as a more bluish and more practical duty uniform. And that is what we're going to be doing in this video. For this, we are going to need to base coat our Zenithal primed model. This base coat will in fact be a mix between a dark Prussian blue and a Celadon blue from Citadel. This can be added all over the hard armor sections. We will be trying to avoid the collar, as well as avoiding all the areas like cloth and everything that we don't want blue. Once we've put down a couple of coats and our base coat is nice and firm and sorted, we can grab the Caledon sky from the previous mix and then use this as a relatively broad layer, covering essentially all of the panels except leaving a small amount of the base coat in the deepest recesses. This will then map out nicely our next steps, which is where we're going to start to build in a few highlights. And we're going to be doing that by mixing a pale desaturated blue into the last layer and then start to layer up the highlights. The first mix will be mostly Caledon sky with a small amount of blue horror, catching every edge and around 70 to 80% of the panel sections. This naturally gives us room to make up a 50-50 mix between the two highlight colors and then continue highlighting up the panels, this time highlighting roughly 30 to 50% of the panel surfaces as well as the edges. I'm sure you can see what we're doing here. What we're going to be doing is grabbing our two colors and then over a few layers building up from our darker blue of our highlight color to our desaturated blue highlight color. Here we're doing that over about 3 or 4 mixes, but naturally you could do it 5, 6, 7 and make sure that the layers are thin so that you don't build up any unsightly texture and get an even smoother transition. However, for now what we're doing is basically going in for our last highlight, which is predominantly going to be our blue horror. But we will also add in just a touch of our Caledon sky just to make sure that the colors are still harmonious, because it means this color has been present throughout the entire mix. This mix, once made up, can be carefully applied over all of the armor panel's edges. We can also use it to highlight the edges of any panel recesses to help build up and show off that separation by having a really nice light and dark area contrast. This will be the last highlight that we are applying, but we can come back in and do a little bit more just to give us a really nice finish, and we're going to be using glazing for that. We want to take our Caledon sky, which has been present in all of the mixes, then add some clean water till we have a relatively thin blue paint. Then, using a small amount of this relatively thin blue paint in the brush, we want to carefully apply it from the highlights and then pull towards the shadows on all of the panels that we have been highlighting. Applying this over a couple of passes will soften out any of the transitions and give us a smoother move from the bright highlight color to the darker recesses. This glazing process should work really well at essentially hiding, obscuring and making the transition of the color highlights that we've done more subtle. Obviously, where we've built up the highlights, there will be that slight color change between each layer, and we've done quite dramatic changes going over 3 or 4 mixes. So by doing this, it will just blend and smooth that out a little bit, giving us a much more gradual color change from that dark recess up to the brighter areas, and it just improves the paint job a little bit. And that is the armor done. And to be honest, I really like how the blue armor came out on this, so I'm going to be keeping this recipe in case I want to use it in future, because I do like how it looks on the model. With that said though, we've got a few other smaller elements that we do need to touch off. And first we can block all those out using a few contrast paints. For these next steps, we are going to need a dark brown as well as a black contrast. And then we're going to be applying these as you would normally apply contrast across the model. So we have elements like the boot soles, belts and pouches, which are going to be in the black contrast. Whereas for the browns, we're mainly going to be focusing this contrast on all of the elements that will be metal in future. Predominantly things like the weapons, the badges and the handcuffs. With these less important areas blocked out, we can now tackle the undersuit and a small part of the armor that we left unpainted in the form of the color, which we want to be white. But here we're actually starting off from a basic skin tone instead of a white or a grey, and we're going to apply this over all of the fabrics, gloves and collar. This will need a couple of layers built up to get a nice smooth, consistent coat before we grab a lighter flesh tone and then use this to pick out all of the main sections of fabric as well as any raised folds and things like fingers. Now, it's probably a good time to point out that we're not doing an exact replica of the Swiss Guard scheme. If we bring up some pictures of the duty uniform of the Swiss Guard, you can see a few differences to our intended results here. First off, they have black shoes and they don't have as bright of a blue uniform, whereas we've gone for an entire blue uniform and we've only gone for black soles on the boots. And that's because really this isn't a direct copy. The idea here is I wanted to be inspired by the various things of the Catholic Church and the various uniforms and everything about it that we can use to bring into the various armies to make them look consistent with that rough theme. So it's not a direct copy, it is an inspired by, which is giving me the creative freedom to do these sorts of changes. And I think it looks nicer to have the full set of armour in blue as opposed to painting the lower part of the armour possibly in black. But let me know. Would you have gone for a direct copy, say having a black hat, because we're changing that for red later, or would you do what I'm doing now, use a little bit of creative freedom, and if so, what changes would you make? To finish off the whites, we have two final steps, and for the first one, we're going to need to grab a near but not pure white, and then we're going to use this to edge highlight all of the white sections on our model. This will mainly be all of the raised sections, edges and tops of folds, as well as things like the knuckles on the fingers. We then have the ability to finish it off really nice and simply with a white contrast wash, which will add a nice bluey grey recessed shade and give us that nice separation and detail across the white sections. This leaves two main sections on the model. We have the unpainted panels and sections and the helmet, as well as the metals. So let's first look at the panels. And we're going to be picking these out in a dark red contrast. This will naturally give us a darker recess and lighter raised section as per normal contrast, meaning that we can follow this up with a quick edge and panel highlight using a scarlet, following out the areas we mapped out with that contrast. With this dry, we can move over to the metals. And for this, we are going to be using a gold. We can simply pick out all of the various metal elements from the weapons to the emblems, letting this dry fully so that we don't have any pigment change when we finish it off, coming in with a wash of a dirty green colour, which will nicely recess shade and slightly age all of the metal components. Naturally, when we're doing these shoulder pads and panels and lights and things like that, we could blend up the highlights from this red, the same as we did the blue panels. We could make it a nice smooth transition. However, on these models, there's only 2 to 3 sections that are actually getting covered in the red. So I thought just doing a quick edge highlight picks out and shows that we've paid attention to those areas and we've not just slapped contrast and forgotten about them. The same is countable for the belts, the pouches and things like that. Essentially, we did a quick edge highlight, made up a slightly lighter brown, went round and slapped a quick edge on all of those areas, which just shows that we do care about them and we have actually painted them. However, it was just a lighter brown and an edge highlight, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'm just going to quickly cover it now. With that all said, this is how the models came out once they are fully painted. I am, again, the person who painted them, so I'm probably likely to say I like them, which I do. But most of all, I like how the blue armor came out. I also think they do go well with the existing men that we've painted. We've done 10 in the dress uniform, and now these are 10 in the duty uniform. And to be honest, I think they tie in quite well. Yes, they look separate because they are painted differently, but I think they fit in quite nicely. As well as we're going to be building out other elements of the army just to give us various different things that tie into the Catholic Church. One of those was, for example, painting up a monk. There's an Imperial Agent that has robes and a hood, and I decided to paint that up similar to the style of robes of a monk and things like that. And we used a couple of different techniques to get a couple of different effects and textures. So if you want to check that out so that you can paint another Imperial Agents model, why not check out this video here? It's just covering the two fabrics. We do it in 2 ways, really, really nice and really quickly. But otherwise, if you don't have time now, do remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.